First of all, this is funny. I used to be on these panels, and I was always a state official. Now I'm not. I can kind of do whatever I want, right?
That could be dangerous.
Yeah, one of my goals in life was to not be a defendant in some version of a right to housing lawsuit, right? Which I never really accomplished until I retired. It was the only way out from it. I used to sit at these lawsuits, you know, and to be the federal government, who I think Jason's right, you know, does have to change that paradigm. And somehow or other, they were always the plaintiff, and the agencies I was working with were defendants. And I kept trying to think, why can't I get to that side of the table? We were the only ones putting the housing up, and they were cutting Section 8, and I'm a defendant, and they were a plaintiff. And I never really got that. But, you know, so it's a pleasure to be here, and I kind of had it's good to follow Jason, because he puts, you know, so much content out there, and I'm sitting here thinking about what things to react to. So now I got like 2 presentations, the one I was going to do, and then the one, you know, that reacts to Jason. I'm going to see if I can get them kind of both together. You know, it's been a fascinating time. You know, the last year and a half, and I've been, you know, 35 years in the healthcare field, most of it in mental health, some with DD, some with education and healthcare. And probably more change has happened in the last 2 years, you know, with this administration, the MRT, and in the behavioral field, you know, for individuals with behavioral problems. You know, we had a raging debate about a year ago when I was still at the department, and, you know, I think the premise was accepted that we wanted to provide integrated care. You know, Jason did mention, you know, the cost of hospitalization. The statistic I think you guys put together went something like $750 million of potentially preventable hospitalizations. 2/3 of that was for folks with mental illness, and 2/3 of the rehospitalizations were for their medical issues. So that's the kind of an aha moment, you know. So what, you know, how can you know, if we're going to treat somebody and keep them out of the hospital and reprogram dollars more effectively, you can't treat them as a mental health patient. You can't treat them, you know, ignoring their mental health issues. You got to integrate. So we had a raging debate about. And we agreed to integrate, and there was debate about how best to integrate, and I think the MRT, you know, was a process where everybody got heard and decisions got made. And so we're now, I think, aligned, you know, both the providers, consumers, family members, you know, housing providers, to say, let's figure out how to integrate. And so we're past that, and now we're into, you know, how's it going to work? And as Jason mentioned, you know, we're at a precipice of opportunity. I mean, if we look at, so we got the philosophies in place. And the federal government, I think, has acknowledged in the governor's press release about the $10 billion over a period of time, which to make the investment to continue to bend the cost curve. How's that going to be used? And let me put a little bit of, you know, meat on the bone, because I think Jason's absolutely right. Through the public hearing process and then through the state application with CMS, you know, we've got to get the federal government to understand, you know, how best to, you know, integrate housing into treatment so that we can stop doing stupid things. I mean, when somebody's living in a hospital, that's a stupid thing, right? So, and we read different stories. Sometimes they're uninsured. Sometimes there's no places for them. Sometimes they're dually, you know, diagnosed between developmental disabilities and mental illness. But they're all, you know, the answer shouldn't be live in a hospital, right? So we got to get past that. And so, you know, the first piece, I think there's certainly an alignment that people appreciate the role of supported housing. I don't think there's a debate anymore. You know, you know, whether it's affordable, you know, who should get access, those are all legitimate issues for those of us, you know, in advocacy or the public sector, you know, to talk about. But the fact that supported housing makes sense, you know, I think is universally accepted. So now we've got that in our favor, and so the question is how to roll it out. And as we look at that waiver and we think about, you know, what should we be advocating for? What should we ask, you know, Jason and the governor's people to advocate for? I think there's a couple approaches, and you know, the first one I think, and the state, you know, took that first step this year, is to think about whether some piece of the state's, you know, billions, you know, 50-some-odd billion dollars of the Medicaid program should be set aside money. I mean, you know, so to the extent that, you know, using existing structures, be it through some of the agencies here, through the things that we used to do at the Office of Mental Health, some of the other housing agencies, just to continue to grow the stock. I mean, to some degree, you just got to get a base level of housing out there so that, you know, as people move on to wherever they are in life, some exist. So, and the state, you know, did that this year. They set aside, I think it was, what, $65 million, $75 million, and that got put out, you know, through more or less established mechanism. And I think that's something that if we think that works, and I thought it was a good idea, you know, to be advocated for. Let's take a set aside, perhaps, of the amount of money that's out there, you know, in the Medicaid opportunities, and say there's a piece of it that goes out either through new mechanisms or existing mechanisms that have proven they can work, and let's just keep doing a little bit, you know, of what we've been doing to do that. So that's the one opportunity. The second opportunity is, you know, people are going to be in managed environments. So now the question becomes, what's going to go through the plans? You know, so when the plans get these capitation rates, you know, what are they going to be allowed to pay for within these capitation rates? And I think there are things that, probably isn't a stretch, to try to get CMS, to work with us on. I think, some of those areas could be transitional housing. And when you think about, clearly, you can understand why a medical, CMS Medicaid program doesn't want to pay, for housing, even though, as Jason mentioned, the nursing homes is kind of a housing place, right? But so they don't want to pay for housing, but transitional housing is kind of different, right? Transitional housing represents a place for someone to be, not permanently, but as a safe, effective environment. We did a project, with the city when they had some issues down in Kings County, where we put together some, transitional housing for people so they could get out of Kings County while they're waiting for a bed. Kings County kept control of the clinical profile of the patient, continued to social work, and eventually that person went to where they're going to go, either a real supported housing, maybe back home with a family member, and that's going to work out, but it doesn't happen in a day. And why would you be sitting in a hospital while you're waiting for the social workers to do their job instead of sitting in a place that's clean and supported and cheap? So, I think the ability to allow, perhaps through plans, I think we can all discuss what the right way to do it is, but, to have, the capitation payments, include some kind of ability to purchase, transitional residences, particularly on the back end, but maybe on the front end as well, makes some sense. And I think the insurance plans are going to want to do that. They're going to look at what their spend is and say, why am I spending, 3 weeks of a hospital stay when somebody got their meds adjusted in 10 days or 5 days? And so I think, we can look at maybe perhaps transitional housing. So then there's services. There's pieces of services that are currently provided or should be provided that, again, I think plans, when they look at what their cost curves are and think about how can they provide better, cheaper, more effective, more consumer-friendly services, will look at things in the framework of case management. So what part of supported housing has a case management function? It's not replicative of the health homes, but services that currently may be funded in various ways or not funded, which will help supported housing do the job they do. And then there's the whole long-term care. Folks with behavioral problems, they have long-term care needs. And so the ability to get, long-term care as opposed to institutional care or nursing home care, that should be integrated. I mean, when we talk about down the road about, what a SNP should look like and what services should be in, I've become a convert. I think you need to have the medical, the behavioral, and the long-term care because people don't come in packages. And I think if we can start putting in the home care, the personal care, and those kind of services in a supported housing environment that includes a piece of case management, integrates with a health home, the insurance companies, I think, will embrace that model because it makes sense, it lowers the cost curve, and it meets people's needs. Then there's a capital issue that's floating all under this. It is that dichotomy between, nursing home is considered an institution, so capital gets passed through, supported housing becomes a state obligation, and I think the challenge, the state officials and Jason and we'll have to advocate for, where do we draw that line? Is an assisted living program, for example, that may serve folks with behavioral needs or maybe not, should that be thought of as, a type of program with a capital component that's legitimate Medicaid expenditure or not? Currently it isn't. So there's some lines about where that line gets drawn. I think that's something the debate should address. Hospice, people don't like to talk about that, but hospice programs are, especially in-site hospice. A lot of the hospice programs that are very progressive look to push service houses out to where people are. So when we have folks, folks with behavioral problems or otherwise, who are entering that phase of their life, and if they're in a supported housing environment, there should be an ability to integrate that, with the kind of hospice services. And finally, just something I know this group doesn't always think about, but I've been spending a little more time. There's a whole other group out there, folks with developmental disabilities who have, by and large, not moved too heavily into the supported housing arena. And as the other waiver goes through, the waiver that's going to look at how to most flexibly and intelligently use our investment in services for folks with DD, I think you're going to see some real interest in thinking about what's an appropriate supported housing model for consumers with developmental disabilities. And I think that'll be a good thing, an opportunity for folks out here, and also an opportunity for family members to have their loved ones in environments that'll help them to grow. So it's a big group out there, and not everybody it's appropriate for, but many it is. And I think you'll start to see a real demand once that consumer group that has been inordinately in fee-for-service starts to get into environments where the consumers have some say over their services and where there's some thoughts about how best can we use the dollars. So that's kind of my rambling speech.
Thank you, Bruce.